Welcome to Fantasy F1 DFS Picks. Let me give you a quick tip on how to build better lineups at DraftKings. But first, please go to DraftKings Network. I have a free article every week, Fantasy Racing Rankings. I recap last week's Formula One race, preview the upcoming race with tips and strategies to use at DraftKings. Let's dive into it. The first thing we're going to look at, obviously, Max Verstappen had a historic season, won practically every race. So one would think he is a great Fantasy F1 player at DraftKings. He is not, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, because he wins and wins in dominating fashion every week for Red Bull. His salary increases to an absurd number, which makes it very hard to roster him. We go a step further, look at his DFS output, and again, you'll see he averaged 20 more fantasy points than the next best driver, Sergio Perez and Fernando Alonso. So again, yeah, he was very good in fantasy, but the salary constraints made it very difficult to play him. We'll go even further. We'll look at his point per dollar value. And again, he was the best point per dollar play almost every single week. And you would think to yourself, in most DFS sports at DraftKings, be it NASCAR, NBA, NFL, we want point per dollar plays. We want guys that are more efficient. They ultimately end up in optimal lineups. Well, Verstappen was in plenty the most optimal lineups, but not as many as you would expect because his salary was just enormous. And we can look at his salary last season. On average, it was $15,175. And that's not when you increase it for being in the captain spot. And again, he starts the season at Bahrain with a $16,000 salary, making it virtually impossible for him to be captain and making it challenging for him to qualify for the optimal or winning lineup because you have to roster other drivers and you need money for them. And in Fantasy F1, most of the drivers finish about where their salary assumes they will finish. There will be a value play each week that kind of squeezes it in there and opens up your roster, and there are some surprises, but the teams are very consistent. This is Formula One. This is the top tier of racing. There's not too many surprises. People are paid a lot of money to make sure that they live up to expectations and they live up to their DraftKings salary. Yeah, that's right. Toto's worried about his DraftKings salary. So here is the real deal. We can look at all the optimal lineups from last season at DraftKings. And one of the things that might stand out to you or surprise some of you is that while Verstappen was optimal or in the optimal lineup 12 times, which actually should be surprising, he won almost every race. But yet only just over half the time was he in the DraftKings Fantasy F1 lineup. Another surprise may be that he was never in the optimal captain spot. You never put Max Verstappen in the captain spot. And heading into this week and throughout the races this season, the way that Red Bull looked in testing, he's probably going to be on top again. Is he going to win every race? Boy, that's hard to do. But either way, he's going to win a lot of races. Should be similar results. I don't expect that you're ever going to be able to put him in the captain spot as long as his salary remains at the top. But you can definitely consider putting him in if we get some value or things swing in different directions in the lineup. You also notice that with Verstappen carrying the day, often Red Bull would end up in that lineup. Now remember, when you roster a constructor and a driver, you cannot roster the other driver from that team. And also, you don't really want to roster a driver that's not going to get the versus bonus, right? We get 5 points when Verstappen beats Sergio Perez. When Sergio Perez loses to Verstappen, that's 5 points he can't accrue. So you want to try to get 5 points from every one of your drivers by them simply outracing their teammate, which we saw Lando Norris do quite often, but also Oscar Piastri was pretty solid as well. But we did see Lando Norris, who was, more often than not priced lower than where the McLaren should be. And we are already seeing that to start the season, that possibly Lando Norris is undervalued again, making him possibly an ideal target for the captain spot. That could change throughout the season. But the big tip that I want to give you right now is just simply looking at who is making it into these optimal lineups. Obviously, Verstappen is optimal a lot. He was very good last season. Same thing for Lando Norris. Leclerc was inconsistent, but we know that the Ferraris have upside. Lewis Hamilton was much better in 2023 than in 2022. And also, he wasn't priced too high often in his Mercedes. Could be a different situation this season. But what we are seeing here, though, is drivers that may be undervalued are getting into the optimal lineups. Alex Albon, Joe, Hulkenberg, and Magnussen were also other key pieces to unlocking fantasy lineups last year. Albon's salary came up as Williams became a solid team, getting a lot of top 10s last season. But when he was underpriced, he consistently beat his teammate, Logan Sargent, which he should do again this season, and score top 10s and be decent point per dollar plays. Hulkenberg and Magnussen, it just often came down to who drove better than the other guy and who was the cheapest. That opened up your lineup. But between those two Haas cars, we saw 7, 5, 12 times Haas was optimal. So again, that 5-point bonus for beating your teammate and being incredibly cheap and maybe getting a point by finishing inside the top 10 wasn't always the case, but you usually just wanted value. Same thing with Joe was that he was often pretty cheap, and the races that he would outrace Bottas, he fit into that optimal lineup. And then occasionally, Alpine threw some speed in there. Alonso was probably undervalued a lot early in the season. But really, when we're looking at optimal lineups, the biggest takeaway is for Stappen, you can pick him, but you can't captain him. I hope that helps. Please, again, check out my article every single week. I hope to see you guys around throughout the season. I hope this was helpful.